Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Henkel. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm really grateful to be with you all today. And as always, I am going to introduce my colleague, my partner in crime, a very good friend of mine, Jean Marie Nevada, who's going to lead our conversation today.
Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
How's it going in Portland?
It is cold here today. I woke up and there was frost on the ground, and I was not at all prepared for it.
Those of us in the desert lack compassion for you. I'm sorry.
Yes, that's okay. But take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jean Marie Nevada, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every week, we get to talk together to talk about an interesting article. And this week, we are talking about Harvey Milk and coming out. So if you would like to read this week's article and get a copy of the questions that we are using for the conversation, you should visit straightforequality.org/discussion series and click on that top article link. The rest of our archive is in there if you'd like to host some more conversations. So this week we are talking about coming out, and I am really excited about our guest this week. I have got Stuart Milk with us. He is the nephew of Harvey Milk and the co-founder of the Harvey Milk Foundation. He has spoken on all 6 continents, which is impressive, Stuart, about inclusion and equality, and he is joining us here today. Hey, Stuart, how's it going?
Hey, great to be here. Great to be here with the PFLAG family.
Thank you. So we are so excited to have you here. So we are talking about Harvey Milk and Harvey Milk's legacy. So again, for those of you joining us, we are using the article, which is entitled Harvey Milk Day, the history of coming out from a secret gay code to a powerful political movement. So Stuart, the article very much goes right to Harvey Milk's legacy and the role that he played in our modern understanding, especially here in the West, about coming out. So, the article goes into all the reasons that he and a lot of his contemporaries at the time were coming out. Could you talk a little bit about what you believe his reasons were? And do you believe that the reasons for coming out have changed over time from the time that Harvey was doing it until what we are seeing today?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't have to talk about what I think because Harvey's luckily recorded enough video and enough, well, not video, but 8mm. And then we have even TV shows of him and, of course, his political recordings that he did on tape. So he realized that the reason that LGBTQ people were had myths, lies, and innuendos sold about them constantly, and we weren't moving ahead, is because people didn't know them personally in their life. And they didn't know them personally in their life because there were no role models and people did not come out. And in the few cases where people did, it was usually the families would sometimes agree not to talk about it. So he realized that if we were not at the table, we would constantly be on the menu. And what he felt it was necessary was for us to also be at the political table, not just being visible, but being at the seats where decisions are made about individuals, about communities, about our society in general, about civil society. So Harvey really, it's interesting because, Harvey was not the first openly gay person elected to public office, but he certainly was the first that asked people to join him. We had a couple of people who were elected to public office. They were brave because they were asked if they were lesbian or gay. They said yes. And all of them had also said it shouldn't be an issue. My uncle said, no, it should be an issue. Let's talk about it. And he would go to places. I remember getting a letter from him when he was running for office. I was 14. He went to a church. He said 1,000 people hated me. And when I left, 998 people hated me. And I remember calling him, and that was expensive back then. And I said, Harvey, what are you so proud about? He said, well, 2 people didn't hate me, and those 2 will become 4, and the 4 will become 8, and the 8 will become 16, unless we actually go and talk to the people who think they know who we are. So we're unique, really very unique. And I know this was another one of your questions, Jean Marie, so I don't mean to jump ahead, but we're really unique in that we have, other minority communities, if your accent is different, if your skin color is different, if your religious beliefs are so that you have a certain religious clothing, you're identifiable. We can hide, and we to this day can hide. We can come out of the closet, or we can go back into the closet. We can be supported by our families, or we cannot be supported by our families. And so this issue of coming out is really so important. And it's, my uncle I think was the first person to say it, but I say it all the time. The heroes that have moved us forward are the everyday heroes who simply do this kitchen table conversation with the ones they love and tell them who they are. Now, this can happen when you're 6, and it can happen when you're 60. I mean, it's an individual. Each individual does that. And it's really something that is so powerful. If you ever want to be moved, and I know your audience probably knows this, but just ask someone to tell their coming out story. I mean, or to ask a parent to tell the coming out story of their child. Ask someone who has a close friend who, we recently had Meghan McCain at one of our events, and she had one of her very best friends when I think she was 5, come out to her. And that changed her perspective. She said she could never be LGBT. And she worked on her father, John McCain, for years. And eventually actually moved him into what ended up being the not only the person that saved healthcare for our country, but also by voting no. But when there was a trans ban reinstituted, he actually put forth a bill that would have stopped it. And so this is really, really important, this coming out. And I'm taking it, I know, into the civil society element, because I think that that's important to do at this time. And we have an election, and people need to voice their opinion through voting. I think it's really important, and I think we play a role. So, for instance, the Harvey Milk Foundation conducted the first ever historic LGBT rights panel at the Munich Security Conference, one of the oldest bodies post World War II, and it was the first time they ever had something. And we had Senator Ron Portman in the audience, and I used him and Eliana Ross-Laitman, so 2 Republicans who until their children came out to them were not advocates for the LGBT community. Ron Portman did a whole 100-degree turn on marriage equality when his son came out with him. When we change hearts and minds, when we're visible. When we're invisible, the lies and myths and innuendos about any community can be maintained. Now, that's true, by the way, and I know this was your additional question, but that's what other communities face. So you can say lies and myths about people of Mexican descent, or people who believe in the Islamic religion, or people who who have an indigenous background. But you can't tell lies and myths about them if you know them personally. And we've got, diversity is so much of our strength. And, it's so important. So I know this is the coming out thing. And sometimes people, I have a very close friend whose husband recently came out to me as indigenous, and he didn't look indigenous. He didn't talk about indigenous issues. And once he found out that I'm a big fan of cross-culturally of indigenous population, because they accepted LGBT people for thousands and thousands of years. It's not, and this is another one of your questions, but it's not a Western invention, because the acceptance of LGBT people goes back way, way, way. It goes back tens of thousands of years. In the North American indigenous community, we were considered 2 spirits. To this day in India, that when they recriminalized LGB, they didn't recriminalize T in India, because everyone knows third gender people. That's what it's called in India. And so, this whole issue of visibility is so important.
And I think that, so we did get into other questions. So I actually want to continue on this, and we're going to completely change up the questions now, Stuart. So here's what I was just thinking about as you were speaking. So I think we've established the importance of coming out, and we've established the power that it has. And we've seen this, from what Harvey did to people before him to what's come after him. But there are still a lot of people who are not out, a significant portion of people. Here in the US, it's estimated that about 46% of people are not out in their workplaces. About 28% of people are not out at all in their lives. We just saw a report in Europe that about half of Europeans are not out about their identities. And these numbers are actually getting a little bit worse in some cases. So I was wondering if you and I could talk a little bit about how we might be having conversations with people about who have not yet come out about the reasons that they should. I mean, it seems sort of obvious to those of us who are out there, but I think, Stuart, what would you say to somebody who, let's say, has not been out ever in their lives and is not a young person any longer and has never really disclosed this information? What case would you make for coming out to them? What kind of power is in there?
Well, it's tremendous power. So let me tell you a story, because I think it's the better way of saying it, because coming out is an individual decision, but it can be very uplifting. So, we've done a lot of work at the Milk Foundation in Italy for the past decade. It's really pretty dark in Italy for not just the LGBT community, but for women, for minorities. And Northern Italy has an ultra-nationalistic, they're on the agenda is all kinds of civil society. So there is an LGBT center named after my uncle in Verona, Italy, the Milk LGBT Center. I went there 5 years ago to see it, and they asked me, can I come back for their pride? Because they never were able to have a pride. And they finally had a new mayor who said, if they're going to do it, he's going to allow it. He said, I'm not going to participate, but I'll allow it. So to try to make this longer story shorter, I did go back for the pride, and in the time that was about a month in between, the Catholic Church actually decided, well, they're going to do a family pride as a counter to the gay pride, to the LGBT pride, and it was really going to be a very anti-LGBT event held on the same day in a different part of the city at the same time. So we talked about this with the activists and talked about the fact that we should be calling the LGBTQ pride a family pride, because it really is. Families include everyone; they don't exclude people. And so we were working on that messaging. Now, the interesting thing about Italy is that there's all these organizations called Archigay, and the presidents, the local chapter presidents, are usually not out. They're heading an LGBT organization. Sometimes their families have agreed not to talk about it. If their name happens to get in the paper, the family looks the other way. And so there was a young man who we're still good friends with, Alex Kermesha. He led the Verona Pride and Archigay. And so they set up this press conference the day before the Pride in City Hall. The mayor said he wasn't going to be there, although we did see him. He did not join the press conference. And it was me and a translator, and that was it. There was no one local that would get on camera and speak. And so, but Alex was caught behind me on the camera on the news, and he got a text message from his boss. And so Alex told us, my boss just saw me at our press conference, and he started to cry. And I said, well, Alex, what's the matter? And he said, well, he said to call me right away. And it turns out that his father was leading the Family Pride event, the anti-LGBT event. He was very active in this thing called, in a Catholic Church program that was putting on these type of events, and was very homophobic. And Alex loved his job. So we sat down with Alex and said, look, Alex, you've got to talk to your boss. You can tell him whatever you want. You might want to consider telling him the truth. Well, his boss called him. He called his boss. We were with him. And his boss said to him, Alex, you were a leader at work. And obviously, you're a leader in life. I did not know good, decent people could be LGBTQ. I am resigning from Family Pride. I will have nothing to do with those organizations again. And as I said, you're a leader in life. We all cried together. And then the next day for Pride, because we've done work in Italy for so many years, La Repubblica, the national newspaper, came up to Andrea Banfi, our Italian lead, and said, is there a good story? And we said, well, we introduced him to Alex, and Alex told his story, and his boss told his story. And now Alex is able to live out. So the power of visibility, the power to change hearts and minds, just think about how powerful that was. And for people to read about it and to wonder, maybe someone leading in my company, maybe someone leading in my family is, and they have been afraid to say that. And so, so Alex was only 25, but still, that was a life-changing event for him. And I would say it was a life-changing event in many ways for the city of Verona.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, what an incredible event for him. What an incredible event for the bus. But I'm like, what an incredible event for the entire city to have that experience and to be able to see that unfold in such a completely organic kind of way. I know that we've had a couple of people make comments, which is true. And I think it's worth mentioning that as we talk about coming out, we're sort of making the assumption that people have access to safe spaces, to supportive networks. And that very much is still not the case for a lot of people around the world. And are you seeing that change, or are you still seeing a lot of persistent problems with that, Stuart?
No, unfortunately, I mean, this is you mentioned it before about Europe, and we've seen, whether it's Hungary, whether it's Poland, even the Northern League in Northern Italy. I mean, we have places going back. We have gay-free zones or LGBTQ-free zones being established in Poland. Viktor Orban and the ultra-nationalist movements in Hungary have LGBTQ, Jews, Roma community, women. I mean, it's a shopping list from the 1930s in Europe. I mean, so we see this golden dawn in Greece. I mean, Marie Le Pen, the National Front in France. I mean, we have all of these movements, and on the shopping list is anyone that's different. And at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're weakening society by dividing and separating us. And it's an old message, and I'm hoping, so to answer your question about support, I think where we have marriage equality, we have really good support. In fact, one of the bright news cycles that happened this week is the Pope's, now he didn't embrace national LGBTQ marriage, but he embraced civil unions, and it's a first step. I award anyone who steps towards us, and I push them to do more. And that's what we certainly would do with our dialogue with the Catholic Church. But at the end of the day, we have tremendous forces that are going against us. And so people need to have support. I love the fact that your viewers are saying and reminding people that they do need support. There are places where it's dangerous to come out. There are honor killings. I mean, we've worked with activists in the Middle East where honor killings take place. How much time do I have time for one?
Yeah. Please tell me.
Story?
Oh, yes.
Say that again? Okay.
Yes,
so, we have a ship that they just laid the keel for, the U.S. Navy ship Harvey Milk, which is being built in San Diego, so not so far from where you are, Jean Marie. And at the naming ceremony, this happened under the Obama administration, the naming ceremony, we got, the Navy had more international press than they've ever had on any naming ceremony in the history of the Navy for the U.S. Navy ship Harvey Milk. And we got this email from a young 15-year-old named Khalil from Kuwait, who said that he was sitting, hopefully I won't cry in telling this story, but he was sitting at the port in Kuwait waiting for the U.S. Navy ship to arrive because he had put aside, when he heard the news about this, his suicide. And the reason he was going to kill himself was not only is it illegal to be LGBTQ there, but he didn't want his family to have to kill him because honor killings are so common if someone comes out. And he said, I didn't want my family to have to do that, so I was just going to kill myself. But now this important vessel named after someone who was killed so that I could be visible is coming to Kuwait. And I'm sitting here waiting for it. And, and it is, I think that defines some of the struggle and some of the light. And some of the light is what we're sending out into the world with things like the U.S. Navy ship Harvey Milk, by the way, is celebrating someone who was forced to hide who he was. And when they found out who he was, most people don't realize that they're naming a ship after someone who was dishonorably discharged. My uncle was a commissioned officer. He was caught in a park where known homosexuals were, and they had 3 weeks of these intensive interviews and finally forced him to resign with a less than honorable discharge. And now we're naming a ship after someone who the Navy realized that was not the right thing to do. And the 2,000 men and women who will be associated with that ship, wherever they go, will teach who Harvey Milk is. And I think this is really the light that we can send into these dark places in the world. But we do have places in the world where coming out is, number one, it can be life-threatening. And number two, you can really, it's one of those things where I know people are constantly looking for support. And by the way, let me just and I think your audience probably knows, but let you know that wherever I go in the world and I meet parents and I meet friends of LGBT and allies, they always talk about the PFLAG model. In fact, I remember this group of women in Hanoi who were, they called themselves the PFLAG moms. And I said, have you talked to some PFLAG people in the US? And they said, well, we're trying. And I talked to the moms, and it took them like 5, 6, 7 years to accept their child. That was the average number of years. But once they did, were the fiercest. I looked at these, I remember, I can still see their faces. I said, boy, if I went into battle anywhere for human rights, I would want these women with me.
But I think that those women are exactly the case that Harvey was making, that these singular stories that they can tell. It took me 5, 6 years to get on board with my kid. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to stick with you for the 5 years that it takes you. Those are those courageous stories that are actually changing the game. And I think it's worth mentioning, I think, Stuart, you definitely hit a note. I think you surprised a lot of people as we talked about struggles in particularly Western Europe, where I think a lot of people assume that things are okay and assume the problems are elsewhere. It's worth mentioning that here in the United States, we know of, and we know there are more, 33 murders so far this year of trans women. And so it is not safe here either. And statistics are showing that it's actually becoming less safe for people in our community at this point. So I want to ask one other question that this article brought up, and I'm just interested to get your perspective because this is very much your universe. The writer, who is a sociology professor at UCLA, mentioned that the concept of coming out and the way it was sort of honed and shaped by people like Harvey Milk and a lot of his contemporaries has now been started to get applied to other social movements. So you mentioned somebody coming out as Indigenous to you. The article acknowledges people coming out as undocumented, people coming out to fight fat phobia. I know that I was telling my mom that just last week, I had 4 of my friends come out on Facebook as women who have had abortions and told their stories. And it very much felt like a coming out experience to me. Do you feel comfortable with that language being used around this? Do you think it's an accurate parallel? Do you think it sort of pays homage to some of the work that's been done? Or do you think we should be finding other language on this?
Well, I'm pretty good with language that if other civil society movements can use language and it benefits them, I'm really not stuck on labels and that it needs to be used but I don't think we don't own coming out. We don't own pride. People should, I believe that there's tremendous worth in all of our differences, and they all should be celebrated. And, but I do think that, that we have to change this idea of differences, I think, from the time people are small, and the differences are across the board. And whether it's the size of someone, as you said, or the ability or disability, or the or their cultural background, the color of their skin, all of those things. We've got to start teaching. Look at the racial justice issue here in the U.S. We have to start teaching people that our differences really is so important to our success. It's important to our success as a family. So we all know that if we exclude one member of our family, we've lost all that potential. We've lost all that possibility. If we exclude one member of our small community, we also lose that in the community, and we lose that as a nation, and we certainly lose that globally. So we want people to fulfill their full potential and their full purpose. And the key to that is that people aren't hiding who they authentically are. And that's anything. I think back to the time when I was in the closet, before my uncle was assassinated. I was 17 when he was killed. And that's when I came out, even though he's told all of his friends that he knew I was gay. He never talked about that with me. He talked about my differences being important. And I think about all the energy I spent hiding pronouns and, part of what that article, the code, the language that people used to hide who they were was really intensive. I mean, it required, think of you, if you, just from the perspective of a business owner, if you had a number of your employees spending all their creativity and energy hiding an aspect of them, whether it's their sexuality, whether it's their ethnic background, you're losing all of that potential and possibility. And so I think it's really important for us to realize that from the time people are young, and we got to keep it going. This requires diligence. This is not something that you can let your guard down on. Whenever you hear anyone disparaging someone because they're different, it's the time to speak up, whether it's on a school playground or a corporate boardroom. And I know sometimes it's easier not to say something, but it's more important that we do, and we have that discussion, and we reach out to people and let them know, wow, our differences are really our strengths.
Yeah, I've started to, we spend a lot of time teaching, and one of the things people always say to us is, what am I supposed to do when somebody says something wrong? And I've said one of the biggest phrases for me that I've started saying to people when they say something I find offensive is, what did you mean by that? And making people actually answer for the stuff that's flying out of their mouth. It's not an aggressive thing to do, but it's an incredible consciousness sort of raiser in that case. I was wondering if Jamie can come back, because I saw we did have a couple of questions. I think we have time to maybe get to one question before we need to wrap up for the week. So what do we got out there, Jamie?
Yeah, so one question that came up, somebody sort of made note of the fact that for some people, the only time in the year that they feel safe being out is at a pride celebration in their community, amongst a crowd, amongst hundreds of other people. And they were wondering if you had any ideas for how to create that in the time of pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I got in, we did the work with the Aboriginal community in Australia and got in Sydney Pride, which is Mardi Gras. So I got in one big pride before we were shut down. And I always say at a pride that, and this is universal, cross-culturally, all across the world, even in places like Palm Springs, in Portland, in Washington, here in Florida, there are young people that show up to a pride who, for the first time in their life, feel that they're really supported. They're out in daylight. It's a life-changing event, because, there's this dialogue about maybe we don't need to do Pride anymore. No, we do need to do it. It's important. And so what I say, what I would say on that particular question, if there isn't a physical Pride, and we did, Interpride did this big global Pride, and I did a piece of that. I'm not a huge fan of replacing a physical event with this, but we need to do it right now. We need to be healthy and we need to be safe. But absolutely, you can create Pride every day in your life. We can have, I try to be as public as I can be. Jamie and I were talking before everyone joined about traveling, and I travel like 200 days a year. I'm always in a conversation with a seatmate who will, for some reason, ask me, "Where's your wife?" I don't know why. I guess maybe I haven't done my mannerisms enough, but whatever. I'm waiting for the day that some strangers ask me, "Where's my husband?" But and that starts a conversation, and people around you hear it. And we can have small prides. We can have prides in our family where we talk about, the things that we would show at Pride, the businesses that are supporting us, the businesses that are not supporting us, the candidates that are supporting us, the candidates that are not supporting us, the policies that are supporting us, the policies that are going against us. We can do it in a very cheerful way. I can tell you that the Pride Day, the traditional Pride Day, I wore all of my Pride regalia. So not many people saw me. I did sneak into the supermarket, and people were looking at me because they were like, I was like, maybe I missed the Pride. And I just wanted to get, I wore my rainbow boa, and I just got, dressed up, even though I was just in the supermarket with my mask. I had a rainbow mask on. But I do think we can bring some of that to life every single day in our lives.
Thank you. And Stuart, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. As usual, I can't believe that our time is up. Thank you so much. We hope that you will come back and talk to us about more things, hopefully when we're all able to be mobile again.
Thank you.
And Jamie, thank you for hosting once again. This unfortunately brings us to the end of our conversation this week. I always want a little bit more time. Thank you so much for joining us. Definitely join us next week. We have a very exciting show again. It is going to be our Halloween show. We're going to be joined by a bunch of people from the PFLAG staff who may or may not be in costumes, as well as their pets. So worth marking your calendar. Thank you so much for everything that you are doing out there. Just as a reminder, if you need help, please visit pflag.org. And as we wrap up the same way every single week, make sure that you run fast, you laugh hard, and you are most of all kind. And please continue to wear your masks because masks work and science matters. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.